In today's video, I'm going to show you how to build a hydroponic system at home using materials most people already own. But here's what most people don't realize. Plants don't need soil to grow. They never did. What they need is water, oxygen, nutrients delivered in the right balance at the right time without interference. Soil was never the answer. It was the compromise, the one we accepted for thousands of years because we didn't know there was another way. And that compromise has cost more harvest than drought ever did. Because soil hides things: pests, disease, inconsistency, problems that live beneath the surface, invisible, until the damage is already done. By the time you see the yellowing leaf, the drooping stem, the loss has already been happening for weeks. Hydroponics removes that uncertainty entirely. But here's the part nobody tells you. Building the system is not the challenge. Most people assemble the parts, fill the reservoir, turn on the pump, and believe they've done it. They haven't. Because what comes after the build is where the real story begins. That is where most systems quietly fail. That is where most beginners walk away, convinced the method doesn't work, when the truth is simpler and harder than that. They didn't fail because they built it wrong. They failed because they didn't understand what they were building. By the end of this video, you will. We begin with two paths. The first is easy, almost instinctive. You gather materials, connect the pieces, fill the system with water, and walk away. It looks right. It feels right. The pump is running. The water is moving. And for a while, things grow. Slowly, but they grow. Then something shifts. A leaf yellows. Then another. The roots begin to darken at the tips. The water takes on a faint smell. Low, dull, easy to dismiss. The grower adds more nutrients, more light, more attention. The plants don't respond. And the grower concludes. This doesn't work. But that conclusion is wrong. The system works. The problem was never the system. It was the path chosen to build it. The second path begins with the same materials, the same space. But it begins with a question, not an action. What does this plant actually need? And in what order? Water, oxygen, nutrients, light, stability. 5 things. And they interact. Adjust one incorrectly, and the others react in ways that look like growth but produce weakness. That sequence, understood clearly before a single tube is connected, is the difference between a system that thrives and one that fades. Now, let's talk about what soil is actually doing, and why leaving it behind is not a risk. It's a decision. Soil holds moisture. It anchors roots. It delivers some minerals. These are real functions. But soil also introduces variables you cannot control. Temperature changes shift its composition. Rain alters its drainage. Pests colonize it without warning. Disease moves through it root to root, silent, invisible, long before a single leaf shows damage. You water the same plant the same way for 3 weeks. One morning, it droops. You check the soil. It looks fine. But something changed underneath. Something you couldn't see. Something you were never going to see until the plant told you. And by then, the telling was already a warning you received too late. That is what soil-based growing asks of you. Constant reaction, rarely control. Hydroponics inverts that relationship entirely. You decide what the plant receives. The concentration, the timing, the balance. Not the ground, not the season. Not the invisible biology shifting below the surface, you. But only if you build with intention. Now, the materials. Not as a list, as a system. Each component exists because something else requires it. Remove one, and the chain breaks. Understand one, and the rest begin to make sense. The reservoir, This is your foundation. A sealed, opaque container, dark walls, no light penetration. Light entering the reservoir breeds algae. Algae competes with your plants for nutrients, clogs tubes, and coats roots. Your water turns green, and your growth rate collapses before you understand why. Size matters. Too small, and the water becomes unstable. Temperature spikes. Nutrient concentration shifts faster than your plants can adapt. Start with at least 10 liters for a small home system. Bigger is more forgiving. Forgiveness matters when you are still learning. The pump. This is the heart. Not a metaphor, a function. It keeps water moving, and moving water carries oxygen. Stagnant water does not. This distinction, moving versus still, is one of the most important in the entire system. Roots submerged in still water begin to suffocate, slowly, silently. And by the time you see the damage above the surface, the destruction below is already weeks old. The pipes and tubes, these are the pathways. Water moves from the reservoir through the grow channel, past the roots, and returns. The path it takes determines how much oxygen each plant receives, whether circulation is even across every position, or concentrated at one end and absent at the other. Uneven flow is one of the most invisible failure points in a home build. The pump is running. The water is moving. Everything looks connected. But 3 plants are thriving, and 2 are starving, and the tubing is why. Net cups and growing medium. The net cup suspends your plant above the water, roots hanging down into the nutrient stream, stems supported above. The growing medium inside, clay pellets, rock wool, perlite, holds the plant in position. It does not feed it. It does not control it. It positions it. This is the mindset shift. In soil, the medium is active. In hydroponics, the medium is neutral. The water is everything. The nutrient solution. Plants need 3 primary nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, alongside a range of secondary and trace minerals. Pre-formulated hydroponic nutrients handle this. But concentration is everything. Too diluted and growth is slow, fragile. Too concentrated and something called nutrient lockout occurs. The roots burn. The plant attempts to draw water in reverse, dehydrating even while fully submerged. It looks like a drought. It feels like a system failure. It is precision applied incorrectly. Here is the hidden enemy. Not pests, not equipment, not neglect. Imbalance. The invisible kind. The kind that lives inside a system that looks like it's working. Oxygen too low. Roots suffocate. Nutrients too high. Roots burn. Flow too fast. Plants stress. Flow too slow. Water stagnates, and the cycle collapses. Plants don't die loudly. They fade quietly. And by the time the silence is loud enough to notice, weeks of growth are already gone. This is the moment, right here, where most journeys end. The beginner sees the variables, the balance required, and the invisible points of failure, and they put the pump back in the box. But building the system is not the hard part. What happens after you turn it on? That is where the real story begins. The reservoir goes down first. Level surface. Clean. Away from windows. Away from direct light. Stable. Unmoved. Cut the holes for your net cups into the lid. Measure the spacing before you cut. Too close and the root systems compete beneath the surface, long before the plants above show any sign of stress. Give each plant room, not luxury. Room. Roots need space, the way lungs need air. Compress either, and things begin to fail quietly. The pump goes in next. Lower it into the reservoir. Connect the tubing, outlet from the pump, up through the lid, along the grow channel, sloping gently back down, and into the reservoir return. A closed loop. Water leaves, travels, returns. This is the architecture. Every component exists to protect this loop. When the loop is clean and uninterrupted, the system is alive. When the loop breaks anywhere, the system begins to die. Secure the tubing carefully. No sharp bends. A bend restricts flow. Restricted flow means some plants receive full circulation and others receive almost none. From above, everything looks connected. The pump is running. Water is moving. But on one side of the grow channel, leaves are wide, dark, and confident. On the other side, pale, narrow, searching. The bend in the tubing was the reason. And you won't see it until the difference in growth makes it undeniable days later, when correction costs time you didn't need to lose. Prevention is always faster than repair. Set the grow channel at a slight downward angle, tilted toward the return end. Gravity becomes part of the system. Water doesn't pool. It moves. Constantly, gently, carrying dissolved oxygen to every root that reaches into the stream. Now fill the reservoir. Not directly from the tap. Let the water sit open for 24 hours first. Chlorine dissipates. The water neutralizes. A clean canvas, ready to carry nutrients without resistance. Tap water poured directly into the system brings chlorine into contact with root tissue. Chlorine does not differentiate between the bacteria you want to remove and the root cells you want to protect. 24 hours cost you 1 day. Chlorine damage costs you the entire growth cycle. Now add the nutrients. Follow the manufacturer's ratio. Use a measuring tool, not estimation. In hydroponics, the margin between correct concentration and harmful concentration is narrow. This is not cooking, where approximation produces creativity. This is chemistry, where approximation produces consequence. Measure, mix, then stop. Check the pH. This is the step that ends more beginner systems than any equipment failure. Not because it is difficult, but because its effects are invisible. The water looks identical at pH 5.5 and at pH 7.5. Same color, same smell, same feel. But at pH 7.5, iron becomes inaccessible to plant roots. Manganese locks out. Zinc disappears from the solution entirely. Your plant is suspended in a reservoir full of nutrients it physically cannot absorb. It starves while surrounded by food. Target pH 5.5 to 6.5. Test before planting. Test again in 2 days. Then again. pH drifts as plants feed, as water evaporates, and as temperature shifts. It is not a setting. It is a condition, one that requires consistent attention, not a single adjustment. Now, the seedlings go in. Place them gently into the net cups. Roots hanging down, reaching toward the moving water below. They find it. This is the moment that feels like success. The system is running. The plants are positioned. The water is moving. Everything looks exactly the way it is supposed to look. This is also exactly where the first path began to fail. Here is why. If the water level inside the reservoir is too high, if the roots are fully submerged rather than suspended just above a flowing stream, oxygen access drops. Roots need the cycle of wet and dry. Submersion followed by exposure. That alternation is what drives root expansion. That rhythm drives the entire plant. Remove the rhythm, and the roots begin to suffocate. Not immediately, not visibly. A week passes. The leaves begin to yellow, starting at the edges, working inward. The stem thins slightly. Growth slows. The grower increases nutrients. More nitrogen, more phosphorus, more of everything. The leaves keep yellowing. Because nutrients were never the problem. Oxygen was. Lower the water level. Expose the lower root zone to air. Let the system breathe. Within 3 to 4 days, new white root growth appears. Fine, bright, reaching in every direction. The yellowing slows. The plant stabilizes. then strengthens. And here is the moment that changes everything, not in the plant, but in the person building it. You fixed it, not by adding, by removing, by giving the plant the space it already knew how to use. That shift, from addition to subtraction, is the foundation of every correction that follows. Set the light cycle now. 16 hours on, 8 hours off. Consistent, unchanging. The plant receives exactly what it requires, no more, no less, without the unpredictability of seasons or weather shifting the equation beneath it. Clean the reservoir every 10 to 14 days. Not because it looks contaminated, because invisible biology accumulates before visible signs appear: algae spores, root debris, bacterial load. Cleanliness in the system is not aesthetic. It is functional. A clean system is a predictable system. And in growing, predictability is power. Watch the plants now. They are communicating. Leaves curling upward, heat stress or low humidity. Curling downward, root oxygen deficiency. Purple stems, phosphorus. Yellow lower leaves with green upper leaves, nitrogen. Brown root tips, the early signal of root rot. Caught here are correctable. Missed here, devastating. Every sign has a source. Every symptom has a solution. You are no longer reacting to mystery. You are responding to information. And that shift from confusion to comprehension is where beginners become growers. Not when the first seed opens. Not when the first harvest arrives. Roots compete for oxygen that they cannot reach. Nutrients are suspended in the solution that the plant cannot absorb. A system technically running pump on, water moving, light cycling, while quietly producing the conditions for failure. This battle happens in every growing environment: soil, water, controlled or open. It doesn't announce itself. It works in the background, in the dark, in the space between what looks correct and what actually is. Most growers never see it. They see the symptom, the yellowing, the slow decline, the eventual collapse. And they name the cause. The method failed. The plant wasn't suited to this environment. The skill wasn't there, but the method didn't fail. The method was never fully understood. And here is the deeper truth, the one that this entire process has been building toward. Growth is not about addition. Every correction made in this build was a removal. Lower the water level, remove the suffocation. Adjust the pH, remove the barrier between plant and nutrient. Clean the reservoir, remove the accumulation before it becomes an interference. Space the plants, remove the competition before it begins. The strongest results came not from adding more, but from identifying what didn't belong and taking it out. This is not a hydroponic principle. This is a growing principle. And it applies further than any reservoir or grow channel. Think about the failures that came before the corrections. The grower who added nutrients when the leaves yellowed. They were paying attention. Trying. Working. They simply reached for addition when the answer was subtraction. The water level that stayed too high, no one ignored it. They didn't know what submerged roots looked like before the damage became visible. These were not failures of effort. They were failures of information. And the moment the information arrived, the correction took minutes. The recovery took days. The result held through the remainder of the growth cycle. That ratio, minutes of correction, days of recovery, weeks of result, is the reason this method matters. Not because it is easier than soil. It is not always easier. But because when something goes wrong, the system tells you, clearly, in ways that have direct answers. You are not guessing at what moved underground. You are reading what the plant shows you and tracing it back to a source you can adjust. That is control. Real control. Not the illusion of control that comes from watering on schedule and hoping. The intentional kind. The kind that produces roots like the ones now trailing through this reservoir, white, expansive, alive. The kind that produces leaves like the ones now reaching toward the light, Wide, deep green, steady. There is a kind of growing that most people never reach, not because it requires rare skill, not because it demands expensive equipment or years of study, but because it requires one thing that is harder than any of that: the willingness to stop, to observe, to ask what needs to be removed instead of what needs to be added. The strongest systems are not the most complex. They are the most intentional. Every component was chosen deliberately. Every variable is understood before it becomes a problem. Every correction made early, before the plant has to shout what it should never have had to whisper. If you have ever watched something grow, struggled through the early stages, lost a plant you worked to keep, wondered where the failure came from, you already understand more of this than you realize. You were paying attention. That is where this journey starts. Not with the right equipment, not with the perfect setup. With the decision to understand what you are building before you build it. You have that now. The rest is already in motion.